This next panel is about obstacles to emergency preparedness. And I'm going to have the moderator, Sarah Ruff, right there, introduce the panel and the topic of this discussion, and you can go ahead and kick it off.
Thanks, Teresa. My name is Sarah Ruff, and I serve as the Community Relations Specialist for a group known as the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. I'm really excited to moderate this amazing panel of experts this morning, talking about obstacles to emergency preparedness. I'm sure that the thoughts of local obstacles your organization may be facing has popped into your head at some point this morning, and we're just getting rolling with the program. So we're going to address some of your questions. We had some amazing questions come in through that online submission form, so thank you if you submitted a question through that. But we also want some audience participation during the Q&A portion at the end of our discussion. And so we will have a roving microphone, as I understand. Yes, Sarah is nodding her head, yes. So be prepared with some of those questions. Jot them down so you don't forget as we do introductions and our first portion of the panel. We're just going to get right into it. Panelists, if we could just go down the line and you just say a brief word about your organization, who you are, and your role with each. I think we'll just get things started. Want to start with you, Dave?
Good morning. I'm Dave Hargreaves, and I am an ambassador for the Parkinson's Foundation, which is headquartered out of Miami, and I am the ambassador at large for the Phoenix area.
Thank you, Dave. Susan is copiously taking notes.
Like, I don't remember anybody's name.
Thought of a question.
Hi, I'm Susie Molloy. I live up north outside Snowflake, Arizona, in a neighborhood with people who have severe environmental sensitivities, including especially chemical and electrical problems. And I serve on the Statewide Independent Living Council, and I love it to pieces. And there are quite a number of people here who are on the silk. I'm going to try to do what I can about representing the interests of my own community, but also silk in its broadness of people with quite a number of disabilities.
All right. My name is Ray Morris. Where do I start with? I worked for Scottsdale Fire Department for 31 years, retired 3 years ago, currently work with FEMA as a disability integration advisor. I've been on several disasters with Gary. Unfortunately, they kept us in different parts of the state, which helped out the state because we would attack them too hard in one area. I have an organization called Dads for Special Kids. We support dads that have children with special health care needs to stay in the marriages and keep the family unit together. That spun into doing emergency disaster preparedness for individuals that live with an access and functional need. My dad in 1969 became a quadriplegic from a drunk driver. So Gary's picture of the circular bed, that's what I saw my dad in for 4 months. And I was 9 years old. I have my oldest son, Zachary, has autism. He's 31. Wow, he's 31. Oh yeah, and been married for 33 years. Hopefully I'll still make it to 34. We'll see. Hopefully if I don't get deployed with FEMA. Oh, if I get deployed with FEMA, I'll make it to 34. But if I stay home, we probably won't. So we do emergency preparedness for families and individuals that live with an access and functional need. And I'm Sarah's boss too with the ADDPC. So yeah, so we'll see how she does with this. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
All right, panelists, we've had a request to make sure that we are all speaking close to the microphone. Individuals in the back are having a little bit trouble hearing, so we want to make sure to get close to our mics. We have decided that the format this morning for this panel is going to start off with hearing from each of our panelists regarding their area of expertise and their organization, going a little bit deeper in depth before we get into the questions. So Dave, would you like to start us off sharing a little bit more about what you get to do with the Parkinson's Foundation and how that plays into emergency preparedness?
Very well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and especially to talk about Parkinson's disease and the aware and care kits that are being made available to Parkinson's patients at no cost by the Parkinson's Foundation. I put a couple of demo kits out there, and the various elements in the kit I will go over later in my talk. But they're designed to help Parkinson's patients plan for hospitalization or emergency events. Let me give you a brief overview of Parkinson's disease itself, because it's widely misunderstood, and I just want to set forth a few facts. I was blessed to be able to have Governor Doug Ducey declare through a proclamation April as Parkinson's Awareness Month. And I want to review a couple of the elements of that proclamation that are key. Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurological disease and is the second most common neurodegenerative disease in the United States today. Parkinson's affects nearly 1 million people, with approximately 10,000 here in the state of Arizona. That's large numbers, 1 million people in the United States and 10,000 here in Arizona. What that translates to you is that these are people in your family, your neighbors, and possibly the person sitting right next to you right now. This is the 14th leading cause of death in the United States today. The disease appears to be a combination of environmental and genetic factors. There are no common objective tests. There are no known biomarkers. And you'll have to excuse me. My right vocal cord, I have a Parkinsonism because I have not been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and my right vocal cord is shrinking. I'm going to struggle through this, and I will make it, though. The only way to determine if a person honestly has had Parkinson's disease is a biopsy at death, a brain biopsy to be specific. I, for one, am not volunteering for that in the near future. At this time, there are no known cures. Yet, when I participated in the Bear Challenge for Parkinson's patients, an obstacle course back in April consisting of 10 obstacles, I learned that the Michael J. Fox Foundation has announced this year that there are 7 drugs that are in the pipeline to stop or to slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. No cures. ASU is running a series of tests right now. Tests are going on at Midwestern University and also the Banner Sun Health Neurological Research Institute. The symptoms vary from person to person, include tremors, and you've probably seen people tremoring, rigidity, slowness of motion, balance issues, trouble chewing, swallowing, and cognitive issues, as well as dementia. Parkinson's will often lead to what's called Lewy body dementia. I'm before you today with a number of symptoms called Parkinsonisms because I have not been officially diagnosed with the disease. One such symptom is the shrinking of my right vocal cord, making it difficult to talk, especially at any great length. You'll be relieved to hear that. This morning, I had one of the major symptoms. I had dystonia strike, and the muscles in my neck cramped at about 4:30 this morning, making it difficult to breathe and difficult to swallow. It does pass. I want to hear something really fun. Cramping relieves all types of cramping. Pickle juice, it really works, honestly. A very small amount of pickle juice when you've got cramping, and it'll relieve that cramping. I also have balance issues, especially when I turn suddenly. I have visual issues which may cause me to lose my place in my notes, but don't worry. I promised them I'd catch you out of here in at least 2 hours. The point is, if you're providing either just emergency care or long-term clinical care, You may be treating a Parkinson's patient. You may be treating them either individually in a long-term care setting or even in a shelter if there's an emergency, but you may not be aware that that person is a Parkinson's patient. My primary purpose, though, here today is to introduce you to the idea of being aware in care. The kits that the Parkinson's Foundation is making available to Parkinson's patients at no cost. We want to reach out not only to patients and their care providers, but also clinical care providers, emergency responders, police, fire, so that everyone can be made aware of the fact that there are things that can be done prior to an emergency. Things can be done prior to admission to a hospital, a long-term care facility, or prior to admission to a shelter to prepare the Parkinson's patient and to prepare those who are going to give care. The tragic reality is today that 3 out of 4 Parkinson's patients, when they go into the hospital, do not receive their medications in the proper dosage, and they do not receive it on time. Let me repeat that. 3 out of 4, 75% of Parkinson's patients admitted to a hospital will not receive their medication on time. What that translates to is someone going into what's called off time, where the symptoms become enhanced and become so dramatic that people in a hospital setting, or maybe in even a shelter setting, might say, well, let's give them another medication. And they will invariably give a medication that will cause the symptoms to be enhanced and to worsen. When this happens, more often than not, it will lead to complications. That's called off time, when a patient is off their medication. And the results can be tragic. The one thing that people need to know is the medications, when they don't have it, it leads to serious complications and a downward spiral for the person with Parkinson's disease. The answer to the challenge is the Aware and Care Kit. At no cost to a Parkinson's patient, the kit means patients can alert their doctors, their primary care providers, their neurological people, and myself, I'm assigned to a movement disorder specialist, someone who is trained to recognize when a person has Parkinson's, what variations in movement are there that present themselves. Let me go over what the kit contains briefly here. The kit contains a medical alert bracelet, and the medical alert bracelet is going to direct the person inside to a medical alert card, giving vital information. We want to know who your doctor is. We want to know who your neurologist is, or your movement disorder specialist. What special conditions do you have? What medications are you on? There's a medication list here too. Parkinson's patients may have a difficult time talking to their primary care providers or other providers about the disease. This is an introductory. It's a short note that the name of the patient is put in there. We give a pad of these, hand them out to everyone who is providing care for you. Really important. There's information in the kit about other types of therapy, and I'll call your attention to 2 of them here because it's so rapidly changing. Things have changed since I first became aware of Parkinson's and the possibility that I may have it. Duopa therapy, something that people normally ingest through the mouth. This is a port that's put in right directly into the small intestine, allowing the exact dosage through a gel to be injected into the small intestine. It doesn't go through the stomach where the benefit of that might be lost. Relatively new in the world, and they're coming up with ways of making it more effective and more long-term. Also, deep brain stimulation. This is a real challenge for people to accept. It means drilling a hole in your head and insertion of electrodes. One of the main disadvantages is they often hit the auditory nerves and the auditory center in the brain, causing the person to lose their voice entirely. Lack of communication, I think we learned that before from Gary. The inability to communicate is serious. Deep brain stimulation is going through a major change, and next year, instead of having a battery and a device implanted in your chest, they're coming up with a battery with the controls that'll be implanted underneath the skin in the area of the brain here where the electrodes are inserted, which means it's a longer lasting battery, less apt to change it, and it's better for the Parkinson's patient. There's not going to be the disruption. You know, you can't go into the hospital. It's like having a pacemaker. You can't go into the hospital and have an EEG or EKG without disrupting a deep brain stimulator. It has to be turned off. So these are the types of things that are pointed out on the cards that are inserted. Medication sheet. And I encourage every Parkinson's patient that I come in contact with, list all your medications, those that are prescription and those things that you're taking that are over the counter. List them all out so that it's there, the exact dosage. It's amazing, but I've learned through interacting with Parkinson's patients that quite often the hospitals do not have the exact dosage. They have to send out to a specialized pharmacy to get the medication that is needed by the Parkinson's patient. Interestingly enough, we tell the people, put a 1 to 3 day supply in your kit. Take it with you, change it out once a month when they change out your medications. Really super important that the Parkinson's patients take responsibility for their own care. We advocate that they also have their party, who happens to be the caregiver, whoever it may be, become their advocate to the hospital or institution. Most important here, we have a planning guide which helps a Parkinson's patient plan for a hospital admission. And I'm going to make a recommendation back to the Parkinson's Foundation that we also make sure that we include a section in there on emergency management. What do you do? What's your plan in case of an emergency? We do have a couple of emergencies that do occur here in the state of Arizona, and it's important that they have a plan in place, that they can plan on what they're going to do next, what will be the best possible outcome if they plan. And they go over that plan with their doctor, their neurologist, and make sure that they go over with each and every person that they come in contact with who may be a clinical care provider. The kits are available, as I mentioned, free of charge for Parkinson's patients. I have out there on the table postcards. If you know a Parkinson's patient or you come in contact with them, pick up a postcard. Make sure you get one. There's a 1-800 number on there that allows you to call the Parkinson's Foundation and order a kit. If you happen to be a caregiver, there are demo kits available also. We are currently in the process of making the kits available in Spanish. That's taking a little bit longer to assemble. Usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get a kit out to a person. They've been assembling kits as fast as they can. The key that I want you to leave here today with is what the kit is called. It's called an Aware in Care kit. You must be aware of the care and the vital nature of that care that you give. People are totally dependent upon that care. Parkinson's patients and other patients with other disabilities are dependent upon the quality of the care that you are going to give. The care that you give will dramatically and forever change a life. So you need to be aware in care. I thank you for the time, and I am running out of voice, but it's a pleasure to be here. Stop and see me at the table up there. Please pick up a postcard. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Some really great information. I'm going to check out one of your kits for sure. All right, Susan, we're ready to hear from you.
Okay, I think in terms of kind of a scattergun presentation, so I'm going to give it to you. If you would, grab a piece of paper and a pen or pencil and write down questions, and if something I say doesn't make sense, please tell me during question and answers or afterward, catch me, or I'll give you my phone number or whatever. Because I'm really going to race through things. Among the real common problems for people with quite a number of disabilities are hyperacusic. In other words, they come from certain sounds. Those can, and I have that. If I hear a blaring horn, that means evacuate the building, I'll probably fall and not lose my ability to speak properly and can't walk. My mobility is impaired. Likewise, sirens, the vacuum cleaner, generators, and helicopters, all kinds of things that you run into in emergency response situation. The flashing lights can be particularly problematic, and it doesn't look like it. When you see me first, I look like, looks like she can take care of herself pretty well. All I need is a flashing light, one of those, or a siren or a beeper, and I'm down. And that's with anticonvulsants and therapy and so forth. I live in a rural area. It's 4.5 hours from here, up on a sand dune, with quite a number of other people with disabilities. And part of that's because we have an older population. Part of it's because the air used to be very clean up there. So people with respiratory problems, heart conditions and things used to move north to get good air. That doesn't make much difference now. We don't have professional fire departments where we live. We have volunteers, and God bless them, they do a darn good job, but it's not the same as having staff on hand to get the EMTs on the road and to get the fire trucks on the road and so forth. It takes 40 minutes to get to the hospital from where I live in an ambulance, and there's waiting for the ambulance to come. So it's hard living in a rural area when the emergency response equipment and personnel and theories are organized for urban areas. For a lot of us, email is not available. There are no cell phones. We need to keep in touch with our attending care people, and that's not possible if you usually rely on regular hours with someone. If there's an emergency, there's not a way to contact the people we need to get us out. Likewise, drivers. Some of what Dave said really applies to people with all disabilities, especially the ones that are kind of invisible, or you think they're invisible. Those would include, of course, treatment authorization requests in your wallet, and a doctor's note that says, honor this, call me, because we really do need a professional MD with letters after her or his name to stick up for us when we're in straits. Like you said, you cannot bear to have the wrong medication at a time like that. And it puts you in a silly position to have to argue with the EMTs or the emergency room staff or the fire department when they say, but you need this and this and that, it will save your life, and you know darn well it won't. It'll put you under. So write that down, fire people. We need some sensitivity on that issue, and I'm sure you're more sensitive than most of the population, but it's just critical for us. Some of the things that I wish were common in emergency shelters would be, to protect people with disabilities, would be things like Nicorette gum, Nicorette patches, things that people can use instead of smoking. Because I hear lots of times, well, the poor guy's nervous. Of course he's going to smoke. And what does that mean to me? I'm really nervous. And they can kill me with smoke, and it just makes an argument that doesn't have to be argued. So we need defense and protection from smoking and smoke. I'd like to see us learn to ask the Salvation Army or whatever emergency response folks are on hand in an area, when they solicit for perfume, shampoo, toothpaste, all those kinds of personal care products, to please request products that are fragrance-free. There are quite a number of people who will be sent into pneumonia or seizures or other real serious problems if they breathe fragrant chemicals. And that doesn't seem like a big deal unless you have this kind of disease, and then it's everything. I went to a preparation conference one time in Glendale, in Glendale at the community college, and there were dozens of first responders and fire department folks there. And the object of that exercise was to practice what would we all do if there were an emergency. The one that we pretended to be having was something like a loud bang or a crash, and the fear of smoke inhalation with toxic stuff, and I don't remember what all, but it resulted in a stampede. And I realized that day that I, my service dog, and my girlfriend, who is blind and had her service dog, were nearly killed doing the exercise. It was really instructive. The kinds of things that happened in the exercise, it was a good exercise for me. It taught me to be real cautious. It's critical if someone asks the first responder to please cut their motor, like the ambulance or the fire truck, please consider cutting the engine, cutting the motor. The fumes from the gas vehicles, especially the diesels, are just lethal. The crowd was dangerous. I had this feeling that there were several thousand, mostly young people, college student age, running at me and my friend Denise, and there was no place for us to hide from these folks. And they just came over us like a wave. And we held on to each other and looked for help, and there wasn't any, and tried to protect our dogs. And that exercise showed me some of the vulnerability that people with disabilities face. The kinds of things that can mark us as a target in a crowd situation, meaning we're not going to make it out alive, I think we should all be aware of. Those would include if we're wearing an oxygen tank or a respirator or a mask to breathe through, if we're in a wheelchair, if we have PTSD and get disoriented readily. A lot of veterans, of course, are familiar with that disability. Anybody using a cosmetic product in the crowd, like just silly things like a hairspray or something like that, can be devastating. I think it's good for us to learn to do things. Also, a disabled placard in the car can mark you as a target. And there are reasons to have your placard on the dashboard, like emergency response folks or kind-hearted strangers might stop and help you. On the other hand, if there are opportunistic deviants heading your way, it could just advertise that you're fragile. So you got to think about things like that. I think it's a good idea to encourage us to use a waist belt or a money belt to keep our ID, our most critical medications, and our doctor's letter, our prior authorization in that money belt around your waist. I don't like to encourage people to wear something around their neck, like their medical alert tag or a kerchief if they're respiratorily impaired and they have to hold up something. It's not good to have that hanging around your neck possibly if you're in a tough spot. It's a common thing for people to come up behind those of us who've used wheelchairs and grab our stuff and go yank, and then we're incapacitated, lose balance, fall out of the wheelchair, whatever. It's just something to know and be careful of. There are also some money belt type things that people can wear on their arms, their forearm or their upper arm or their leg that can't be yanked off easily. This is grim. If you're dealing with women, maybe Native women, excuse me, or fundamentalist Mormons, or whomever, people who wear long braids, have them tuck the braids into their coat, into their blouse, into their coat, for the same kind of reasons. You don't want them to be vulnerable to somebody who can grab them from the back and pull their hair. It's not a hard thing to do, and it sounds silly until you're in a bad crowd. And I've been in bad crowds. It scared me to death. Not just this one in Glendale, but also a food riot once. And in college, I lived in neighborhoods that were really poor, and it was an urban situation. And there were a lot of kind people and a lot of people for whom there were no holds barred. And I'd like to mention to Gary Karp that I thought your presentation was just outrageously good, and I appreciate it enormously. And also, could you think about your use of the word accessible? When you say accessible, I think you mean accessible for people with mobility impairments and visual impairments and hearing impairments and maybe Parkinson's. I don't know. I'm not sure how broad your use of that word. Big? Okay. For those of us with so-called invisible disabilities or the new disabilities like the chemical sensitivities or things like that, accessibility is a different animal. And when we see a sign on a building or a program or something that says this is an accessible program or an accessible building, people like me always think, oh yeah, that means that if we were in a wheelchair, or if using a wheelchair were our only obstacle, we could get in there, but that's not the point. Getting in here could be pretty tricky if you're sick, which I used to be with the chemical sensitivities, because these lights are pretty awful. There's a carpet on the floor. Some of you are wearing fragrance products. Just things like that you'd never think of that mean access or no access for a lot of us. While I'm on that topic, if I were to, or someone like me, meaning the constellation of disabilities I have, said, please don't try to give me a sandwich with wheat in it. I really mean it. I have celiac disease. It makes a huge difference if I ask for a special diet or something. It means eating or not eating, or getting sick, or maybe not getting sick. And I'm a heck of a person to have on your side. I would want me, if I were a fire department, I would say, where's Susie Molloy? She's straightforward. She'll get people out of awful situations, and she has a driver's license, and she cares a great deal. Oh, crap. That's right, we made her sick. She was trying to breathe behind the fire truck, and she went down. I or lots of others of us can be assets because we can troubleshoot for the departments and the EMTs. We know a lot about our own disabilities and some other people's too, and I would use us to the max. Don't lose us by not taking care of us, because we're pretty good at what we do. One of the main points, I guess I wish I could right across the sky, with an airplane, would be what's an emergency for some people may not be an emergency for others. the people who can't spot emergencies, unfortunately, include Department of Health Services, Department of Environmental Quality, the governor. We're in a heap of hurt if there's a disability that is devastating, say one of the controlled burns up north in the state right now. We have those with wild abandon. The Forest Service thinks that they're great because they do cut down the underbrush and make the forest safer in some ways. However, it's got several dozen, hundreds, I don't know, people in our area, in the northern part of the state, in bed, on oxygen if they can afford it, not just inconvenience, but really put at high risk. And those people that I care about a lot, that I've seen go under, include elders on the Native American reservation, on White Mountain Apaches and Navajo, where there are lots and lots of controlled burns. I would think it would be a good idea for some of the folks out there setting fires to keep us safer, to consider the consequences for little kids, asthmatics, people with COPD or pneumonia, or just being really old and not breathing very well. And I don't think that we're considered very much when these programs like burning the forest, underbrush, are considered. I don't know what I want to cope with it. I think I'd like to have my oxygen tanks filled up for either free or no cost. I'm on SSI, which is like $700 a month, and I can't really keep my tanks full. That kind of thing could help. Air filters could help. Having generators, if we each had a baby generator that could keep our sleep apnea equipment and other electrical dependent devices going, I'd feel better. Otherwise, let us know. There's going to be 1 month of sheer hell. We're going to burn all our stuff that month. You guys just get out of Dodge. And then, you know, we'll need counseling about it because we'll be mad. But it would be better than having surprise fires popping up every couple of days. And then another fire starts and it's all of a sudden worse. And the smoke is coming at you from this way, that way. And then there's one up north of Flagstaff that kicks in. There's no place to drive unless we have some help and some preparation. And as I said, the governor does not see that as a devastating emergency. A state of emergency will not be called. That means there's no money for us to get out of town. There's no medical equipment, no durable medical stuff, no food, nothing. Because if a fire or a flood or a hurricane can be called an act of God, like zit, lightning starts a fire, or whatever, then there can be some coverage if the governor declares it an emergency state. If the governor and DEQ and DHS and other agencies don't say, yeah, this is legally just turned into emergency, you're on your own. There aren't any shelters. There's no $10 a day for food. There's no $15 a day for a motel. You're cooked. You know, it really is very devastating, and it makes a lot of us lose heart once in a while.
Susie, I am so sorry. We're going to have to, just for time reasons, hear from Ray, but those are really, really interesting points. And I know that some of the questions people had online are going to circle back to some of those issues with coming back to, you know, making shelters accessible for not just mobility disabilities, but other types like you mentioned. So thank you so much for sharing.
One more shot.
One more.
Okay. Well, I think it's critical to pay attention to our religious and spiritual practices. That means if somebody holds their Bible in, or their Quran, or our crucifix, or our rosary beads, or something like that, look after us, because that we can rely on a little bit in a time of emergencies and stresses. Some people are going to need help to set up funeral arrangements, and that's important for people of certain faiths, especially Native families. And some of us need appropriate food to keep our spiritual practice. Gluten-free wafers I need for communion, or I can't eat a wheat wafer, but it wouldn't take too much to plan for those kinds of things. And then lastly, very lastly, honestly, lastly, is that those of us with disabilities that might not show, or that don't have our own wheelchair or walker, we feel a great deal about the ADA and Rehab 504, like people in Vietnam might have felt when the big helicopters came in and took their relatives out, and you see this helicopter going up into the air, and they pull up the ladder, and you're not on it, and they say, "Bye, we love you," and they're crying. They're gone. We're not. And the ADA did that to us. It emphasized people with certain disabilities, which cut the rest of us out of the fold even more. So please watch that. I'm done.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're up.
Really important points. All right, Ray, could you just give us a quick 5-minute overview of some of the things that you were going to touch on, and then we'll get to some of the questions submitted online.
Yep, I
I
can do
used
that.
up all his time.
We're going to make it work.
We'll make it work. I'm just going to, a real quick comparison. My dad, who in 1969 becomes a quadriplegic, and I remember I was coming home from in the Coast Guard at Liberty, and I think it was 82, and I'm driving down this country road in Oregon, and I see this figure. And I'm looking down the road, and I'm like, what the heck is that? As I get closer, I realize it's my dad. He's in his first power chair. He has independence. He could get out of the house on his own and go do something. Prior to that, it was us in a Hoyer lift, putting him in a chair, setting him over here. If he wanted to just sit over there, we'd move him over to there, and that was his independence. Now, the dude's going down a country road in a power chair, and I'm like, this is just wrong. But he's happy, he's smiling. So his whole independence, boom, blossomed. On the other side, my adult son, Zachary, with autism and cognitive delay, 31, he's mentally about like a 2-year-old. Has full physical ability and all that, but doesn't have the intellectual ability. So in a house fire, my dad had the intellectual ability to know he needed to get out of the house if it caught on fire. My son Zachary has the physical ability, but doesn't have the intellectual ability to know to get out of the house. Both individuals need a plan that enables them to maintain their level of independence, whatever that may be. In emergency preparedness, we all need to look at it that way. What do I need for my independence? What do I need to be self-sufficient? And if we start and build on those principles forward, don't rely upon the government, don't rely upon 911. 911, we want to be there, we want to help you out, but in a disaster, we're not going to be able to be there for everybody. So people have to take the responsibility for themselves. So with my dad, we built the plan around him for his level of independence. If the house ever caught on fire or the smoke alarm went off, we knew what to do for him. We worked with the local volunteer fire department that they knew about him and knew where he slept at, invited him over to the house. On the other side with Zachary, we did the same thing with the fire department. I pressured the fire department into accepting and put into the CAD system about my son Zachary. So when the computer popped up or address, it let them know, hey, about Zachary, where he slept at, he was unable to self-rescue himself. So you build the plan and you build it where it's mobile. So with Zachary, things traveled with him wherever he went for his plan. If he was at his day program, the plan traveled with him and we knew what was going to happen and we talked to them about it. So we all need to build our plans and make them mobile, take ownership of them, and make it part of your daily life. It's what we do. If you want to be happy, make a plan so it enables you to be happy. All right? That's a quick 4 minutes. How's that?
Thanks, Ray. That's great. We're going to get to some of these questions. And if you have a question in the audience after hearing from our panelists, please raise your hand. We'll make sure that a microphone gets to you and that your question gets answered. We don't want to leave anyone out. Thank you, Sarah Ann. She'll be the one with the microphone. Don't be shy now. All right, one of the first things that we're going to give to Dave, someone wanted to know the top issues facing older folks. They specifically said Phoenix, but I'm going to broaden that, in Arizona, when it comes to our theme, obstacles to preparing for an emergency. You addressed on them a little bit, issues with medications, getting to the hospital, medical personnel don't know the right dosages. What are some other things that the emergency managers and other staff here in the room should keep in mind when dealing with older individuals?
The elderly present some special issues. And as I read the question, it said, what are the 2 top issues that face the elderly today? And it can be summed up very easily. One of the top issues is falls. Over 9,500 people in the United States died last year. And this is according to the National Council on Aging. You can reach their site, and they have a lot of information about falls and the elderly. One of the things done for preparation for that, a lot of medical providers today offer courses. I know mine does in my primary care provider. They have courses in Tai Chi, yoga, to ensure better balance issues. If you're over 65, chances are in your lifetime that you will fall once. That increases by age 80. The chances are, 1 in 2 that you will fall sometime during your lifetime. That means 1 out of every 2 people over the age of 80 is going to experience a fall. And as I said with, Parkinson's, the fall is very problematic because most people will do something, hit their head or hit another part of their body, leading to long periods of either rehab or death. So it's extremely important. The other issue faced by the elderly is aloneness. I came very close to this, and I'm still wrestling with it from time to time. Last year, my wife passed away. My wife of 38 years passed from small cell lung cancer very quickly, very suddenly. And there I was in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, almost 1,700 square feet, feeling the aloneness. And people I notice in my community, I live in Sun City, I notice the isolation of some of the people around me. I make it a point to go out and visit my neighbors. I'm so pleased when I hear of events like the Girl Scout troop or a Boy Scout troop going out to a rest home and visiting with the people, sharing with them, getting some idea of the lives that these people have lived and how important it is. But aloneness is a major issue, and you've got to get out and get involved in the community. There are a number of entities and agencies out there. Again, I point you to the National Council on Aging, which has suggestions on things people can do. I love it. Sun City has programs for dance, for bicycling. Recently, it's been discovered that, in particular, backwards bicycling is excellent for balance issues with Parkinson's patients. I was part of that study. It's amazing what it does to improve the balance. Sitting on a bicycle and pedaling backwards for a period of 30 minutes had amazing results on my balance. But those are the 2 major issues I see facing the elderly today.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think those are good things to keep in mind. And the loneliness part, that is really key, because if you establish those relationships, when a natural disaster or another disaster hits, you already know your neighbors and you know who needs assistance. That's a really good point. Ray, let's get down to some of the details of individuals and how they can prepare for power outages, brownouts, blackouts, especially when their equipment, whether it's oxygen, other types of devices, necessitates electricity. That is definitely something that I think you can address. And then a follow-up, which is preparing for an emergency when it comes to medication, maybe not devices, but medications. What are individuals supposed to do when the insurance companies don't necessarily allow for stockpiling of meds?
All right, I'll start with the medication one. Simple and easy one. Most insurance companies, at least Access that I know of, every 28 days you can get your prescription refilled. This is what we've done with our son Zachary, who's on some medication that's one of them's $2,800 a month, another one's $1,600 a month, and thank you, federal government and state, for paying for it. So what we do is every 28 days we get the prescription refilled. So say there's 30 days this month. So on the 28th day we go fill it up. Now we got 2 days of medication. The next month's 31 days. Boom, now I got 5 days of medication. And we kept doing that. We were up to a point of, we almost had 90 days worth of medication backed up. And we just kept rotating it. And that's how we get around getting our stockpile of medication. So what we ended up doing is, in part of Zachary's plan, he was gonna go over to John and Lisa's house. That was our evacuation point. Now here's 14 days worth of medication. Boom, we put it over there. And then we just rotate it out and do something like that. That's the simple, easiest way. When it comes to power outage and you got a 13-year-old boy at home and the power goes out and he can't play his video game, is that a disaster? It is for him and those around him. So the best thing for power outage is just sit down and talk about it. Have a conversation. Talk with other people that are in your support group or you have relationships. Learn from them. Learn from those other people. I remember it was with you, Gary, or somebody we were talking about was power chairs, and there was a group of individuals that got together and they found out they all had similar chairs, power chairs, that they could use each other's chargers. So they created a little group of, hey, if something happens in my place, hey, can I come over to yours? So that's what they did. They didn't have to worry about moving the chargers because they could do it with each other. So it's those type of conversations of having, especially like with respirators, CPAP machines. Talk with people. Get us in a group of people. You talk about a generator. When a group of people get together and have a generator and they support each other. One of the projects I did through the state was with the DTA programs, and it was getting day treatment agencies together to support each other, and their plans support each other. So if we do that as individuals, we support each other's plans. So not one person has to come up with everything, but we, as a group, like if I need to evacuate, boom, I could go over to Gary's place. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. Depends on who paid for beers last night. Anytime. So you do those to support each other in your plan, and that's the brainstorming to come up with solutions.
Great tips. Anyone out in the audience have a question? We got one over here.
I'm just curious if anybody knows if there are grants for generators for nonprofit agencies for power outages.
I get that question a lot with FEMA. A lot of places are looking, not that I know of. Usually there's not federal grants, sometimes through foundations, but I would highly recommend as you get with a group of agencies, organizations, and approach it together, then they're more apt to, because it's a group, not just one agency, because when it's one agency, it's not very cost effective.
Gary has some follow-up thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I come from the federal world, if there's a FEMA individual assistance declaration, then there is something called non-income dependent ONA, other needs assistance. And I want to learn whether there is state ONA. That's a common thing for state other needs assistance. But this is a form of assistance that includes money for generators. So it exists there. It may exist somewhere in the state.
Yeah,
Anybody know about that?
Yeah, that's right. If I'm remembering right, Gary, it's you put the money up front, and then you can get reimbursed for it after when the disaster is declared under emergency other needs assessment. Emergency related, yeah. But this is after the fact, not before. So if something happens and you end up having to buy a generator and it becomes this declared disaster, you can potentially get reimbursed up to $500.
Any other questions? I have a follow-up question for Susie. When it comes to shelters, you mentioned a really good best practice is to have some Nicorette gum, Nicorette patches on hand for people who smoke so that individuals with chemical sensitivities can breathe easier. Any last tips briefly about ways to make shelters more accessible for individuals with multiple chemical sensitivities or similar type of disabilities?
Sure, I'll try to be quick. I'm so sorry I went over my time limit.
I'll get it out of you later.
That sounds like something I do. Okay, things to do to make the shelters or the emergency response process more accessible. Some of the requests are gonna seem exceptional, and they won't make sense unless you've had this disease or something like it. And that would be, we need cotton. We almost all have to wear cotton. No fabric softeners. Keeping things as fragrance-free as possible, and that means the staff and as many people as it will cooperate, which of course won't be everybody, and the cleaning products, especially. If somebody shoots off a lot of phenol cleanser in the bathroom, you're not going to the bathroom. That does it, you know? I'd say that permitting us to pick out the things that we need is probably almost primary. One of the real simple no-brainer things, I'm sorry, is to have foil, mylar blankets and foil. We can use those on top of conventional bedding, for example, so we don't get sick from the mattress to flame retardant or detergents or things like that. And we can put them over chairs if the fabric is hurtful. I'm sitting on my briefcase right now and it's working pretty well. But in an emergency, I guess I'd sit on my coat. I don't know. But if the shelter has that kind of thing, it can help. Be prepared to have some area of the shelter lit using plain old-fashioned incandescent bulbs. Maybe operated with solar electricity, something real plain, because these lights, I guess people like me would have to sleep under the tables, or I don't know what we do. Turn things off. If there are non-essential electronic devices in use, cut them off. And cut down the fluorescent lights. Any kind of electronics you can cut off, please do it. And then I do have a list of unthought out things I'd like to rattle off.
All right, we're about 5 minutes over our time, so can you fit them into a minute?
Yep. Okay, stuff to think about that I've noticed people needing when I've been sheltered or when I've been in an emergency situation. Medication for hepatitis C. Narcan for people who've goofed up their street drugs or whatever, or taken too much of the wrong medication. Tranquilizers for people who are meth addicts. Methadone, please. morning after pills, medication for some of the more common medications for HIV, quick access to dialysis, pregnancy tests, condoms, feminine hygiene products, diapers, rape kits, all kinds of things that we don't want to think about, but they can get to be as important during an emergency as any other time in our lives. That's it.
Great list. Thank you to each of our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. And thank you for your questions. Hopefully this sparked some things to think about as you go back to your organizations and craft a plan and increase those best practices. I know we have another presentation coming up. Thank you so much for your graciousness, Sarah Ann, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.